France is the #1 tourist destination in the world, and it has been for decades.
Year after year, France has been beating its own record. In 2019, nearly 90 million people visited the country.
The aim was to have 100 million tourists in 2020, but then the pandemic happened. After a rough couple of years, though, the tourism industry is back on track.
In this episode of French Connections Plus, we take a snapshot of France's thriving tourism industry. It's hard to summarize just how great France is, and I'm not just saying this because I'm half French. Let's just say that France has a lot going for it, and it goes beyond the wild charm of Paris.
There's really something for everyone, whether you're a city person or a nature lover.
And another major asset is French gastronomy. It's mind-boggling just how many wonderful things there are to eat and drink.
On top of being beautiful and full of delicious food, France's location means it's easy to get to, and its size means it's easy to get around.
Here's a look at some of the greatest hits in French tourism, some of which might surprise you.
If France is the #1 tourist destination in the world ahead of Spain and the United States, it's because every corner of the country is steeped in history and culture, and the scenery is as diverse as it's beautiful. There's the glittering coastlines of the French Riviera, the lavender fields of Provence, the snow-capped Alps, the castles of the Loire Valley, not to mention the beautiful beaches of the overseas territories like Martinique and Guadeloupe. Still need convincing? France has 45 sites inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List and features many cities of high cultural interest. Paris, of course, but also Marseille, Lyon, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Strasbourg, Lille, each with its unique heritage, culture, and gastronomical specialties. So what's the most popular place? You might think it's the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Versailles, or the Mont Saint-Michel, but it's actually Disneyland Paris, originally called Euro Disney. With about 15 million visitors a year before the pandemic, it's the most visited tourist site in France.
When you think of the stereotypical tourist in France, you might imagine busloads of loud Americans or Chinese, but in fact, most of the tourists here come from neighboring countries.
80% of tourists come from Europe, mainly Great Britain, Germany, and Belgium.
It's hard to overstate just how important the tourism industry is to France's economy.
Tourism makes up about 8% of French GDP and represents about 2 million jobs, so the livelihoods of a lot of people depend on it.
Like many countries around the world, France's tourism industry was hard hit by the pandemic.
With international travel at a standstill and many museums closed, reservations in hotels and restaurants plummeted, and the industry pretty much ground to a halt.
French tourism officials are eager to get back to business, though some might argue there were perhaps a few too many tourists in France before COVID.
Being the most popular destination in the world has its perks, but it also comes with a darker side: overcrowding. Before the pandemic, favorite hotspots like the Louvre in Paris were swarming with tourists. A sea of people queuing up in a seemingly endless line to see the Mona Lisa, of course. 1 minute to take a photo and scoot.
It's incredible how many people are inside, and it's not like relaxing watching some nice pictures. It's
In the wake of the pandemic, and in a bid to limit overcrowding, many museums have adopted time-sensitive ticket reservations.
Ticket, please. Only online, just only online.
But be warned, it's recommended to purchase them in advance to avoid any bad surprises.
My boys are very disappointed. We've come from Canada and we're only here for a couple of days and they're unable to go in.
Is France a victim of its success? The debate goes beyond the capital. Popular tourist destinations across the country have been asking the question, where do you draw the line? Take the village of Saint-Antonin-Noble-Val, north of Toulouse. Back in 2019, locals launched a petition against mass tourism in their charming medieval town, a divisive issue.
Que Saint-Antonin garde son authenticité, tout en étant accueillante hein, mais qu'elle soit humaine et pas autre chose que ça.
Quand l'hiver, il n'y a pas eu chat, c'est triste.
The downside to a booming tourism industry goes beyond annoying crowds. It can have a major environmental impact. Étretat in Normandy, famous for its breathtaking cliffs, attracts millions of tourists a year. But the signs of over-tourism are increasingly visible. Whether they take home pebbles from the beach as a souvenir or stray off the path to get the perfect shot, visitors are causing damage to the local ecosystem.
Le chemin officiel qui est situé ici, et instinctivement, le public qui ne veut pas quitter des yeux la mer va s'approcher du bord de falaise. Et donc ça génère un piétinement de la végétation, un sapement de la végétation qui induit une érosion des sols.
Some of France's natural sites have been sounding the alarm and pushing back with drastic measures. Marseille, France's second largest city, has set quotas for the number of visitors to the Calanque National Park, a stunning natural wonder. Caps have also been set for the island of Porquerolles, 3 of Corsica's top sites, and the number of people allowed to summit Mont Blanc, the highest peak in Western Europe. It's a delicate balance. France needs tourists, but wants to ensure they keep their footprint to a minimum.
One of the favorite tourist destinations in France, of course, is the capital, Paris.
Well, the City of Light is by far the most visited city in France, and it's neck and neck with London for the second most visited city in the world behind Bangkok.
One of the reasons Paris is so popular is because of the sheer number of things to do here. Tourists really get a big bang for their buck.
Well, the capital is home to some of the world's largest and most popular museums, like the Louvre, which is the most visited museum in the world. You've also got the Centre Georges Pompidou, which is dedicated to contemporary art, or the Musée d'Orsay, which is dedicated to Impressionism, just to name a few.
Paris is also home to some of the world's most recognizable landmarks, like the Eiffel Tower, the most visited paid monument in the world. But there's also Invalides, Notre Dame Cathedral, or the Sacré-Cœur Basilica in Montmartre.
And part of the charm of Paris is the way you feel when you're here. There's a certain romance to the capital, so buckle up as we take you for a ride. A great way to discover Paris is to walk around the city, but even more fun is to take a ride around the city, and that is exactly what you offer, Simon Burke, with Chango Tours. You offer sidecar tours of Paris. How did you come up with the idea?
The idea kind of hit me out of the blue. I was in the southwest of France, in the Basque region, where my parents live, and I've always loved motorcycles. I knew tourism would return, so I decided to just put the two together. And then after speaking to my wife, she's quite the intelligent lady. She reminded me that I had been working in tourism in Paris for over a decade. So I knew people here, I knew the city very well, and it would be much easier to start my own business in Paris.
So you've been working in the tourism industry for over a decade. What is it about Paris that makes people want to come here?
Oh, I mean, goodness, that can be such a long answer. It's a layer cake of history and stories. On the surface, what brings people here, the hook, post-COVID world, it's how Instagrammable it is. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, and when we were in high school, it was pretty grimy. But since, I think they started in 2001, the city has just been on this policy of polishing itself. I mean, even the Dome Church where Napoleon's buried was completely black. Notre Dame was completely black, but it looks so fantastic now that everybody wants to come here and check it out for themselves.
So if you could boil it down to 5 top destinations in Paris, what would they be?
My top 5?
Oh no, the top 5. What do people want to see?
The top 5 that people want to see? Oh, I mean, Eiffel Tower, Sacré-Cœur Basilica, Arc de Triomphe, the Louvre. What would be the 5th? I guess maybe the Opéra Garnier or Les Invalides.
COVID really impacted the tourism sector here in France. Tourists are back, but how has COVID affected the way they want to see the city?
So all of the published data and reports have shown that the biggest jump in consideration was group size. People are far more willing to pay more for a good experience and to make sure their groups are small. Bus tours suffered enormously, but it boded very well for this. This is just 2 people per rider.
And do you have any anecdotes about what happens behind the scenes in the tourism industry?
One of the things that I like the most about working in tourism is that everybody who works in it is kind of crazy. Everybody has itchy feet, they can't sit still for very long, and they're in the business of having fun. So from the outside, I think a lot of people can assume that there's aggressive competition, but I think especially thanks to COVID, most tour operators now, even if we're direct competitors, we get along.
So Simon, you can take 2 people on your tour, 1 in the bucket, 1 behind you, and you're gonna take me for a ride?
Yes. Ready?
Many of you sent in your questions about France's tourism industry, like Elaine McCarthy. She had a comment on what she called the fairly recent open friendliness of English-speaking personnel in the hospitality industry. She says, did I miss the part where the Department of Tourism required French waiters to drop the snob act?
Well, Elaine has a good point, because back in the day, people used to say, France is a lovely place except for the French, and that was especially true about the capital. Now, these days, there might be the occasional bad apple, but globally, feedback about the French tourism industry has really improved, thanks in part to a government-funded publicity campaign.
Next, Marcelo Marcondes wanted to know what still needs improvement in the French tourism industry.
Well, these days there's a big debate about sustainability. While the economic impact of France's tourism industry is very positive, there are questions about its environmental impact, whether it's things like energy costs, pollution, waste. All these things have come under scrutiny, especially as France gears up for the 2024 Olympic Games here in Paris, because it's all good to want the tourism industry to keep growing, so long as it's done in a sustainable way.
Well, that wraps it up for today's show. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget, you can always tweet your questions at Villeminot or reach out on social media.
And we'll see you soon for another episode of French Connections Plus.
Versailles, Mont Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbors many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24. Discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.